The year was 1867, and the Arizona sun beat down like a hammer against the earth. Heat waves shimmered across the open desert, turning stone and sage into mirages that blurred the line between sky and ground. The land breathed dust and silence, broken only by the flap of a hawk's wings high above, circling as if it already smelled death. Ethan Graves rode slow, reins loose in his callous hand. His horse, a lean sorrel named Ash, carried him with the weary rhythm of a beast that knew long miles and little rest. Ethan's saddle creaked with each step. A bedroll, a half-empty canteen, and a bag of flour from the trading post were all he carried. That was his life now, just enough to get by, nothing to build on. He was 35, worn thin by sun and years. His jaw was shadowed with dust and stubble, his eyes pale as weathered steel. The war had taken his youth. Debt had taken his ranch. What remained was a man whose silence was heavier than words, riding back to land that barely yielded grass for cattle anymore. It might have been another empty ride, if not for sound. A rifle cracked. Then another. The echoes rolled across the canyon ahead, sharp and urgent. Ethan's hand froze on the reins. His first thought was bandits, white men robbing white men the way of the frontier. But then came a scream, high, broken, desperate. A woman's scream. He could have turned. Should have. Trouble that wasn't his own had no business following him home. But Ethan had lived long enough with ghosts to know one thing. Sometimes you couldn't ride away. He kicked Ash hard. The horse surged forward, hooves pounding sand as they rounded a jagged outcrop of red stone. The scene hit him like a blow. 3 men in trail-worn hats had cornered 2 girls against a cluster of boulders near the dry riverbed. The girls couldn't have been more than 16, their dark braids tangled with dust, their dresses torn. One clutched a broken bough, her hand shaking as she raised it, though no arrow remained. The other held her sister's arm, pressing back, wide-eyed, as the men advanced. One outlaw laughed low. "Don't waste your breath, little doe. No one's coming for you." Ethan didn't think. His rifle was already in his hands, the barrel level from horseback. "Let him go," he called, voice rough with dust. The men spun, startled, their laughter breaking. And then the desert erupted. Ethan's rifle cracked, smoke curling from the muzzle. The first outlaw dropped where he stood, chest torn open. The second cursed, raising his pistol. Ethan fired again, grazing the man's arm. The outlaw stumbled back, howling. The third broke for cover, firing wild shots. Bullets whined past Ethan's head, chipped stone flying from the rocks near the girls. Ash reared, neighing sharp. Ethan slid from the saddle, rolling into the dirt. He came up firing, his Colt spitting flame. The second outlaw screamed as lead cut across his thigh, dropping him hard. The last man moved fast, circling wide, eyes full of hate, his pistol cocked. Ethan's rifle was empty. He reached for his Colt, but too slow. The outlaw's grin twisted. "Got you, boy." Before the shot came, a rock flew from nowhere. It struck the outlaw's temple with a crack. His aim faltered, the bullet flying wild. The older of the 2 girls, eyes burning fierce, had thrown it. Ethan didn't waste a chance. His Colt roared once more, and the outlaw fell backward into the dust, gun slipping from lifeless fingers. The canyon fell silent but for the ragged sound of breathing. Ethan lowered his Colt, chest heaving. His shirt sleeve was torn, blood trickling from a graze where a bullet had kissed him. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked to the girls. They stared back, tense and trembling, like fawns ready to flee. "You're safe now," he said, voice low. "Ain't nobody touching you while I'm standing." But the way they looked at him, half trust, half fear, told him he'd stepped into something far greater than a shootout in the desert. The bodies were already baking under the sun, buzzards circling lower with each minute. Ethan dragged them aside, covering their faces with rocks. The girls kept their distance, whispering sharp words in Apache, eyes darting between him and the corpses. He wanted to ride on. God knew it would have been simpler. But when he glanced at them again, the smaller one clutching her sister's hand like a lifeline, the older trying to stand tall though her knees trembled, he thought of his own sister, Mary, who died in Missouri when he was just a boy. He hadn't been there to save her. Maybe that was why he couldn't walk away now. "What's your names?" he asked, voice gentler than he felt. The older girl touched her chest. "Nalin." Then she placed a hand on the younger. "Dasodi." "Ethan," he said simply. They nodded, though mistrust lingered in their eyes. He offered his canteen. They hesitated. Then Nalin took it, letting Dasodi drink first. Their movements were cautious, dignified, like wild creatures who've been cornered too many times. "They'll come back," Nalin said finally, her English broken but clear. "More men." Ethan glanced at the horizon. She wasn't wrong. A trail of vengeance always followed spilled blood. "Then we best move," he said. They walked beside him as he led Ash through the canyon. The sun dipped lower, staining the rocks in crimson fire. Shadows stretched long, and the wind carried a dry whisper through the sage. By nightfall, they found a hollow in the cliffs where brush grew thick. Ethan built a small fire, the flames crackling low. The girls sat close together, whispering softly in their tongue. For a long while, only the fire spoke. Then Dasodi broke the silence. "You kill white men for us." Her eyes searched his face. Ethan stared into the flames. Seemed the right thing at the time. "White men hate us," Nalin said. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like flint striking stone. Ethan looked at her, the firelight carving shadows on his face. "Maybe, but not all men choose hate." The girls exchanged a look unreadable. Night deepened. Coyotes howled across the desert, their cries sharp and lonely. Ethan lay with his rifle across his chest, eyes half shut but ears awake. The girls slept curled against each other, their breaths steady, fragile. And though danger waited in the dark, Ethan felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. Morning painted the desert gold. Ethan doused the fire, tightened the cinch on Ash's saddle, and motioned for the girls to follow. Their steps were weary, but determination burned in their eyes. They walked miles beneath the pitiless sun. Dust caked their throats. Hunger gnawed, but they pressed on. Every sound became a threat. Every distant hoofbeat, every hawk's cry. At midday, trouble came. A rattlesnake lay coiled across the path, scales glinting like whetstone. Its rattle shook sharp and deadly. Dasodi froze, eyes wide. Before she could scream, Ethan's boot came down hard, pinning the snake's head. His knife flashed. The body twisted, then stilled. He tossed it aside, breath steady. "Keep moving," he said, voice calm, though his heart still thundered. Later, the land broke open to a river swollen with snowmelt. The water churned white, roaring like thunder. Nalin shook her head fiercely. "Too strong." "We cross," Ethan said, "or die waiting." He lashed branches into a crude rope, tied it to Ash, and led them in. The current seized them instantly. Dasodi screamed as the water dragged her under. Ethan dove, arms burning as he fought the current. He caught her by the wrist, hauling her gasping to the far bank. Soaked and shivering, they collapsed on the shore. Ethan coughed river water, chest heaving, but relief swept him. He glanced at the girls. They were alive. That was enough. They made camp in a cave that night, safe from the wind. Ethan's hands shook as he built the fire, the adrenaline finally leaving him. The girls huddled close, silent but watchful. When flames licked high, Nalin met his eyes. She whispered in halting English, her voice barely above the crackle of wood. "Thank you, brother." Ethan blinked, the word hitting him harder than any bullet. For the first time in years, he smiled. Just a small thing, but real. Outside, the desert night grew colder, stars glittering sharp as knives. The road ahead was dark, full of enemies, but Ethan knew one truth. He wouldn't abandon them now. By dawn, he would ride them home. But he had no idea that saving them had already sealed his fate. The desert gave no quarter. By the third day, Ethan's throat burned like it had been scoured with sand. The sun showed no mercy, bearing down on them until sweat dried before it could fall. Every step was a test, every mile a gauntlet. Nalin and Dasodi trudged aside, their bare feet cut by stone, yet they made no complaint. Pride burned in them. Apache blood carried its own fire. But Ethan saw the weariness creeping in, the way their shoulders sagged when they thought he wasn't looking. At dawn, they skirted the edge of a plateau. the world opening wide below. Sagebrush stretched for miles, the horizon a wavering line of heat. Ash plodded along, head low, ribs showing. Ethan kept one hand on the reins, the other on his rifle. Trouble never gave warning. By midday, the trouble came. A hawk screamed overhead, spooked from its perch. Ethan froze, squinting into the scrub. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not the lazy rhythm of a lone rider, but the quick, uneven drum of many. He shoved the sisters into the rocks. Stay low. Dust rose on the far ridge. 3 riders, maybe 4. Their hats were pulled low, rifles slung. Ethan's gut turned. The surviving outlaw had friends. The men rode the ridge line, scanning below. One raised an arm, pointing. Ethan's grip tightened on the Colt at his hip. If they spotted him, there'd be blood. The sisters pressed close, silent as stone. DeSoto's breath trembled, but Nullin's eyes burned steady. She didn't flinch. The riders moved on, the sound of hooves fading into distance. Ethan let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd held. But it didn't ease him. They were being hunted. That night, they found shelter in a canyon cave, shadows deep and cool. The fire cast long fingers of light across the stone, flickering against etchings left by people long gone. Ethan chewed jerky in silence, watching the sisters whisper together. He caught fragments of their words: family, death, survival. He wished he knew more of their tongue. Still, he didn't need words to see the truth. They had lost kin, maybe their whole village. These two weren't just running from raiders. They were running from grief itself. Nullin looked across the flames. You have family? Ethan stared at the fire. Had. Long time ago. She studied him, head tilted like a hawk eyeing prey. Why help us? He swallowed. Couldn't ride away. Not this time. Her gaze lingered, sharp and searching, before she turned back to her sister. In the silence, Ethan realized the truth pressing heavy in his chest. He wasn't just keeping him alive. They were keeping him alive, too. By the 6th day, the land began to change. Pine trees rose against the red cliffs, and the smell of smoke drifted faint on the wind. The sisters quickened their pace, a flicker of hope in their weary steps. They came upon the camp at dusk. Dozens of lodges stood among the trees. Fires burning, children playing in the dirt. The air was alive with voices, with life. For the sisters, it was home. For Ethan, it was the mouth of the lion. The moment they stepped from the brush, the camp erupted. Warriors seized bows. Women pulled children back. Shouts filled the air. Ethan's rifle was stripped from him before he could breathe. Hands bound him, rough and unyielding. He was dragged through the camp, the ground biting at his knees. Nullin and DeSoto shouted in their tongue, their words sharp, pleading, but they were swept aside. At the center of camp, the fire roared tall. Before it stood Chief Nayati, a man carved from stone and scarred by battles past. His hair was streaked with gray, his chest painted with the red of war. His eyes fixed on Ethan with a weight that pinned him in place. The sisters broke through the crowd, running to their mother, who gathered them in fierce arms, tears streaking her face. Relief lit their reunion, but Nayati did not look away from Ethan. One warrior thrust the outlaw's revolver at the chief, speaking fast. Nayati listened, then turned his gaze back to Ethan. Through broken English and the translation of others, the story came. Nullin told of the men who hunted them, of Ethan's gunfire that cut them down. Her words rose with passion, her hands trembling. DeSoto clutched her sister, nodding, whispering the truth with wide, pleading eyes. But Nayati's face remained carved from granite. Finally, he stepped forward, towering over Ethan. White man kills white man. Why? Ethan's voice was steady. Because they have killed your daughters. Didn't matter who they were. The crowd murmured, suspicion thick as smoke. Some eyes narrowed, others softened. But Nayati's stare didn't waver. You spill blood, the chief said. You bring death upon us. Maybe you seek favor. Maybe you seek to trick. I see no truth yet. Ethan clenched his jaw. I didn't ask to be here, but I won't apologize for keeping them alive. Gasps rippled to the crowd as defiance. Yet the sisters stepped forward, crying out. Nullin's voice shook the night. fierce and desperate, words sharp as knives. Nayati raised his hand, silencing her. Then he pointed at Ethan, his voice low but final. Tomorrow, he faces fire. Then we know if he lives as friend or dies as enemy. The camp erupted, half in approval, half in protest. Ethan was dragged away, bound tighter. But his eyes found the sisters, Nalin's burning with fury, Dasodi's glistening with tears. And for the first time since the desert, Ethan wondered if he'd made the wrong choice when he turned toward the sound of gunfire. They kept him tied at the edge of camp, a stake driven deep into the ground. The night was long, lit by firelight and echoing drums. Warriors painted their faces and danced, their shadows leaping against the trees. It was a celebration, or a warning. Ethan couldn't tell which. He sat with his back against the stake, wrists raw from rope. The smell of roasting venison carried on the wind, but none was offered to him. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but worse was the waiting. In the distance, he saw the sisters watching. Their mother held them close, but Nalin's eyes never left him. Ethan couldn't read her thoughts, but he saw the fight in her gaze. She wasn't giving up. At dawn, they dragged him to the fire. Warriors circled, faces painted in red and black. The air was thick with smoke, the chant of voices rising with the flames. Nayati stood tall before him. "Trial of fire," he said. "If you endure, maybe truth lies in you. If not, your bones feed the earth." Ethan said nothing. Words wouldn't save him. Only fire. They stripped him to the waist, drove him to his knees. Coals glowed in a wide circle, heat blistering against his skin. A warrior pressed a burning brand close to his chest, the heat searing, though it stopped short of touch. The crowd roared. Pain was the measure. Silence was the answer. The brand pressed closer. Ethan clenched his teeth, muscles taut. Smoke filled his lungs, sweat streaked his face. His mind screamed to give in, to beg, but he held firm. Minutes dragged like hours. The fire burned, the chant rose, and Ethan remained. His silence became its own defiance, its own kind of strength. At last, Nayati raised his hand. The chanting stilled. The brand was pulled away. The chief studied him, eyes narrowing, searching. For the first time, something shifted, respect, faint but real. But then a cry cut through the stillness. A warrior stumbled into the circle, shouting words sharp with fear. On the horizon, dust rose, riders, armed, coming fast. The outlaws had returned, and they hadn't come alone. The camp erupted in chaos. Women rushed to gather children. Warriors seized bows and rifles. Nayati barked orders, his voice carrying over the din. Ethan, still bound, struggled against the ropes. The sisters ran toward him, terror in their eyes. The fire's trial was over. A new one was riding in with blood on its heels. And Ethan knew the chief's judgment hadn't been decided yet. His fate and theirs would be written in the gun smoke to come. The council fire roared higher, throwing sparks that rose into the night like lost souls. Ezra stood alone at the center of the circle, the light making sharp lines of his worn face, his hands bound before him with rawhide. Around him, the Apache gathered, men, women, children, all watching with unblinking eyes. Their judgment weighed heavier than the bindings. Chief Nate stepped forward, his face a mask carved by years of loss and authority. His voice was deep, carrying over the crackle of the flames. "This man saved 2 daughters of the people," he said, gesturing toward Nalin and Ayoka, who stood near the edge of the circle. "But he has also shed Apache blood. His people kill ours without thought, without mercy. Tonight, we decide if saving 2 lives can balance the weight of so many taken." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded grimly, others shook their heads. Ezra lifted his chin, refusing to bow. He could smell the wood smoke, the tang of sweat, the faint sweetness of sage thrown into fire. His heart hammered like a war drum, but he forced himself to meet the eyes of those who wanted him dead. Nalin took a step forward. Her voice trembled, but she steadied it with will. "He carried us from death," she said. "When the river tried to claim us, he gave his strength. When wolves came in the night, he stood between us and their teeth. Without him, we would be bones in the dirt." Chief Nature's gaze lingered on her, unreadable. And yet, he said slowly, his kind has made many of our daughters' bones in the dirt. His eyes cut back to Ezra. Tell me, white man, why did you save them? You could have turned away. Why risk death for those your people call enemy? Ezra drew a slow breath, the words scraping raw against his throat. Because they were children, he said, and because I know what it is to lose family. My wife, my boy, taken by fever. I couldn't save them, but I could save your daughters. That's all I had left in me. A silence followed, heavy and dangerous. The Apache around him shifted, their faces tight with conflicting thoughts. Some spat into the dust, unimpressed. Others glanced toward the girls with something like softening. Then a man stepped forward from the shadows, tall elk, a warrior with scars across his chest and fury burning in his eyes. He raised his hand high, holding a bloody strip of cloth. My brother was killed last winter by a white rancher, he growled. He wore this cloth at his belt when he died, and now this man thinks one good deed erases his people's crimes. He turned to the circle, voice rising. Let him hang from the pine at dawn. Let the buzzards feast. The circle erupted, voices shouting, some for death, some for mercy. The fire blazed brighter, fanned by the storm of emotion. Ezra's pulse surged, but he held still, every muscle coiled like a horse sensing the whip. Nalin and Ayoka broke through the shouting, pushing into the center. Nalin's dark eyes shone with tears. If you kill him, then his courage means nothing, she cried. Would you make us believe the people repay life with death? Her voice cracked, but her words cut through the noise. Even Tall Elk faltered, lips pressed tight. Chief Nate raised his hand, and silence returned, heavy as a burial stone. His eyes moved from Ezra to his daughters, then back again. At dawn his fate will be decided, the chief declared. Until then he will be bound. The circle dissolved, the people slipping into the shadows of their lodges. Ezra was dragged to a post at the edge of the camp, tied so tightly his wrist burned. The night pressed cold against him, coyotes howling far off in the hills. But what froze him more than the chill was a look on Chief Nature's face before he turned away. A look that said mercy and death were balanced on the edge of the blade. Ezra closed his eyes, the fire's glow fading into the darkness behind his lids. He thought of his boy, of a fever-racked bed, of a promise he'd once made to protect his family. Maybe, in some twisted way, saving these sisters had been his attempt at keeping that promise. And maybe, come dawn, he'd pay the price for it with his life. Dawn came slow and cruel, the first light spilling across the canyon like blood on stone. The Apache gathered again, the circle tight with expectation. Ezra was dragged forward, his face bruised from a night against the post, his lips cracked, but his spirit unbroken. Chief Nate stood tall, his daughters at his side. His voice rang out clear. We are a people of balance. Life for life, death for death. But sometimes the spirits demand more than blood. Sometimes they test the courage of men to show us who they truly are. He turned to Ezra. You saved my daughters, but you also carry the weight of white men's sins. Today, you will face the Spirit's judgment. You will walk the trial of fire. A murmur swept through the crowd, some nodding approval, others whispering in awe. The trial of fire was a test known among them, rare and deadly. A man would be set loose, pursued to the canyon by warriors with burning torches. If he reached the sacred stone before the flames or the hunters claimed him, his life was spared. Ezra's got twisted, but he forced his voice steady. And if I fail? Nature's gaze was like steel. Then your death will feed the earth, and your name will be forgotten. Rawhide was cut from his wrists, the sting of blood rushing back into his hands. Ezra flexed his fingers, then glanced at the circle of warriors now holding torches, flames licking hungrily at the dry morning air. He felt the weight of every eye, the judgment pressing down like a millstone. The chief raised his arm. Run. Ezra bolted, dust kicked beneath his boots, lungs straining as he pushed up the canyon path. Behind him, shouts erupted, the crackle of fire snapping closer. Heat pressed against his back like a living beast. He stumbled over stones, skidded around jagged turns, his breath tearing ragged in his chest. Every sound became sharpened, The crack of branches underfoot, the roar of flames licking dry brush, the thunder of warriors in pursuit. A torch swept close, flames brushing his sleeve. He ripped free, throwing himself into a scramble up the rocks, palms bleeding against sharp edges. The sacred stone loomed in the distance, a jagged pillar bathed in the light of the rising sun. But his body screamed in protest, his strength flagging. He thought of his wife's smile, his boy's laughter, memories that cut deeper than pain. He thought of Nalin and Ayoka, their small hands clinging to his when he pulled them from the river. Those lives had weight. He couldn't let them be lost to his failure. With a guttural roar, Ezra forced his legs to drive harder. A torch slammed into the ground beside him, fire leaping. He hurdled it, hair singed, smoke burning his lungs. His heart hammered like a drum of war. The sacred stone drew near. The last stretch was a steep climb, jagged and merciless. His hands clawed for purchase, his boots slipping. Warriors shouted below, their torches flashing. One lunged, fingers grazing his ankle. Ezra kicked free, scrambling higher, blood streaking down his arms. And then his palms slapped the cool surface of the stone. Silence fell, as sudden and absolute as a storm's eye. The warriors froze, torches crackling but unmoving. Chief Nate stepped forward, his face grave. "The spirits have spoken," he said, his voice carrying like thunder through the canyon. "This man's courage has bought his life." The crowd stirred, some relieved, others bitter. Tall Elk spat into the dirt, his fury unquenched, but he did not move against the chief's decree. Ezra leaned against the stone, chest heaving, every muscle quivering with exhaustion. But inside him, something unbroken surged, a fire not destruction but of life. Nate met his gaze. "You will not walk free of burden," the chief said, "but you walk free of death. Remember this day. Remember the blood that has been spilled between our peoples. And remember that even the harshest land can show mercy once." Ezra bowed his head, too drained to speak, but his heart understood. As the Apache dispersed, the dawn spreading gold across the canyon, Ezra stood alone at the stone, the smoke rising in thin threads around him. And in that quiet he felt the truth settle deep. He had come to the edge of death and found life again, not for himself alone, but for those he'd saved, and for a world that still demanded more than any man could give. And maybe, just maybe, the frontier had spared him for a reason yet to come.